executive arrested on Canadian soil.
Kovrig was arrested in China.
Mutual travel advisories issued.
Canola, just the latest casualty in an ongoing battle.
Yeah, you may have noticed Canada has a China problem. But what you may not know is what's going on behind the scenes. A massive influence campaign by the Chinese state that some say attacks the foundations of our democracy: free press, open education, and support of basic human rights. We're going to show you how it works. It all starts with the United Front, an offshoot of the Chinese Communist Party. Mao once called it communism's magic weapon. President Xi has now added tens of thousands of staffers referred to as influence agents. And according to a CSIS report, it's likely that some of those agents are at work here in Canada in powerful positions. We're told their job is to spread the Communist Party's message and, if necessary, to censor dissidents. We can't provide direct proof the Chinese state directed the examples we're about to show you, but former diplomats and intelligence officials tell us there's definitely a campaign. And a lot of the details are laid out in a confidential report by the Canadian Coalition on Human Rights, sent recently to the Canadian government. We got a hold of it, and its conclusion: there appears to be an organized campaign of harassment and intimidation targeted at certain groups and individuals outside of China opposed to Chinese government policies. It lists cyberattacks, phone harassment, hate propaganda, following and spying on people, and threats to dissidents' families. So why all of this? Well, usually for supporting what the Communist Party calls the 5 poisons: Muslim minority Uyghurs, Tibet or Taiwanese independence campaigns, the banned religion Falun Gong, or arguing for democracy in China. Just last month, a Canadian Uyghur woman tried to talk about China's persecution of its Muslim minority at Hamilton's McMaster University. But her speech got disrupted by Chinese students, and she posted this video the next day.
I heavily suspected and believed that these students have strong connection with the Chinese consulate, and they are instructed by the Chinese consulate.
And these WeChat screenshots we found do suggest that the Chinese students were in contact with the Chinese consulate. And since then, she's received more messages that seem to threaten her son. Then there's what happened at University of Toronto Scarborough last month. The about-to-be new student president is Jimmy Lam. She's Tibetan. And soon after she was nominated, thousands of hateful messages lit up her social media accounts. And she joins me now. So Jimmy, what was that like? There was something like 11,000 messages. How hateful, how bad were they?
Yeah, there was some that said, I see you, I punch you, or like, your mom's dead, or, they were just brutal to read through.
There were threats made against you, against your life. There were threats of rape, threats against your family. Are you afraid now? Have you been intimidated?
I'm the type of person that likes to take a challenge head on. So when this did come across, of course, there is the safety threat of physical threat. And for that, I've taken certain measures by the university. I've reached out to Toronto Police. Other members of parliament officials have reached out to me in terms of support.
So what was behind it? Who or what do you think was directing this?
So it has come to my attention that there was an online petition that was around that time that was leaked. And it seemed like it was mostly by international Chinese students who felt that, as a president, I wouldn't represent them well enough because I come from a Tibetan background.
There was a petition online on WeChat. There was messages circulated advising foreign Chinese students to try and stop your presidency. It sounds awfully orchestrated.
Yes.
But by whom?
Because of my organizing experiences in other spaces, there's often a big link with the Chinese embassy or the Chinese government because they see me as a threat. And because of that, I was able to tell that, there must be a connection, because there's no way that students can organize within a couple of hours in the thousands. If that was the case while doing elections, I wish I knew the trick. I would have used that on my students and tried to reach out to as many students as I could during campaigning.
So do you believe this is tied to the Chinese state?
I believe so, yes.
But you don't have proof of that?
No, and that's why I say it is my assumption, and I believe that it is. And also because I've recently come across articles on Global Times on me.
Which is a Chinese outlet?
Yes, exactly, and calling me a separatist. So I'm like, well, thanks for giving me that much attention.
So how big a deal is this? I mean, are you seeing more of this? Is this getting bigger? Why should people, beyond you, receive these horrible messages? Why should people care?
Students come to campuses hoping to become global citizens, hoping to become leaders, expand their knowledge and learn more, right? Not to be limited or policed by a separate entity, especially another country or another state.
So are you suggesting that Chinese students are being used by the state? They're being manipulated?
It's either magic or someone else is orchestrating it.
Jimmy, it's been so lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
We reached out several times to Chinese government officials here in Canada for comment, but got no reply. Although in the past, they have denied allegations of directing any campaign against Jimmy. So how did we get here? Well, a lot of authorities saw this coming. Take the warnings from CSIS and even the FBI about something called the Confucius Institute. They're all over the US and Canada, from Carleton University to Seneca College to the Edmonton Public School Board. They're funded by the Chinese state to promote Chinese language and culture. But just this week, the education minister in New Brunswick told CBC their curriculum is really just propaganda, and he wants them out of all the schools there.
But they are agents of the Chinese government, and their job is to make China look good. And that, to me, is the fundamental problem.
The Toronto School Board kicked them out too, even after huge protests, and McMaster asked them to leave as well. So that's just the education campaign. There's a lot more here. There are now growing concerns about China's plan to influence and monitor our media too, from the apps that we use to the most traditional forms of news that we read. Just this week, news the U.S. is forcing the Chinese owners of Grindr to sell the popular dating app over fears it could be used for blackmail. And a splashy China-positive advertorial appeared in one of the world's most influential newspapers, The Washington Post. So what's going on here? According to Reporters Without Borders, China has a master plan for a global propaganda campaign. Here's 3 things you need to know about that master plan. Number 1, Beijing uses high-tech censorship and surveillance tools to influence and control its 800 million internet users. It banned Facebook and Twitter. Mark Zuckerberg tried to get back in, posing for photos with China's president, even posting this shot of a morning jog across Tiananmen Square, where hundreds of protesters were killed in 1989. But China doesn't need Facebook. They have WeChat, with 1 billion subscribers who use it for everything from instant messaging to shopping, banking, and more. Soon, WeChat will even issue virtual ID cards. But data collected by WeChat is not encrypted. So in theory, the state can see anything and everything on the app. Number 2, it's trying to impose that New World Media Order outside China too. Western journalists are used to endless cutbacks, but China is investing billions in global media, expanding the country's powerful state-owned television network to 140 countries, including Canada. And the third thing you need to know, China is influencing journalists. According to Reporters Without Borders, members of the press are invited to attend free and sometimes really lavish trips disguised as seminars and courses. But maybe the travel isn't really free. In our research, we spoke to 2 Toronto journalists from China. One told us she's been the target of a harassment campaign for over a decade. Her family's been threatened, her computer's been hacked, her photo was even superimposed on pornographic images, and they were published widely online. The other journalist says Chinese community papers here in Canada are often fed stories directly from a consulate, and that advertising then gets cut off if they write anything critical, so they don't. My next guest is a foreign affairs columnist who just published a book on the Chinese state's influence campaign in Canada. Jonathan Manthorpe is the author of Claws of the Panda, and he joins me from Victoria. So, Jonathan, you've been following this for a while. How big a threat is the influence campaign? Just how intense is it?
Well, it's very intense, and the intensity, of course, depends on the target. I've spoken to very many people who say they feel under siege and under observation of the Chinese Communist Party almost every day, and they find it very intimidating. I mean, the vast majority of these people have come here to escape this, and they find themselves subject to the same kind of Big Brother observation as they did in China, and they're very distressed, many of them.
So the government has been warned for decades about these kinds of dangers. Why isn't it doing more?
Well, I think that it's been suborned. As I said, the Chinese Communist Party has spent about 70 years with a charm offensive on the Canadian elite, the business elite, the political elite, the academic elite, and it's been very successful. With the politicians, they've managed to persuade generations of Ottawa politicians of both major political parties that China is on the verge of reform. And quite honestly, our political leaders have not taken it seriously for a long time, and they've been warned. The CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and others have warned them for 2 decades that I know of that this is going on here and that it is a serious problem, and it's about time we devised a new way of dealing with the People's Republic of China.
You know, you hear about these death threats. We've seen some of them. You hear about these influence agents. It sounds almost like they're Chinese spies trying to take control of the Canadian human rights agenda. It almost sounds like a conspiracy theory. Like some people don't believe this.
Well, exactly. Well, and I wrote the book, you know, and I've been a foreign correspondent for over 40 years. I've seen conspiracy theories, and I know them when I see them. But you know, halfway through this book, I examined that very closely, and you know, the clear evidence that it is not a conspiracy theory, Wendy, is that the same thing exactly is going on in Australia, in New Zealand, in the United States, in Southeast Asia, and in Europe. And so that reassured me that I wasn't following a conspiracy theory, that there are indeed, this is indeed a campaign of influence and intimidation that the Chinese Communist Party is mounting all over the world.
Jonathan Manthorpe, it's so interesting. It doesn't look like this relationship is going to get any less complicated.
No.
Thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure, Wendy.
Jonathan Manthorpe in Victoria. We asked China's officials for reaction to our investigation, and they didn't reply to multiple requests.